Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to the BC Healthy Communities PlanH HPP webinar. We look forward to hearing and knowing more about how to create Indigenous partners to inform healthy public policy. This series is a three-part series that we talk about various topics for local government and Indigenous government. And today we're really focusing on how to create partnerships. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. If you could put your name and land acknowledgement in the chat, we'd love to get started in a few minutes with everyone on. Please introduce yourself, add your name and the land acknowledgement, and then I'll start with our land acknowledgement and my introduction. I look forward to seeing many people. We had over 170 registered participants today, and so we're delighted that this is a topic that multiple communities are asking about. Thank you for joining us. My name is Connie Allsopp, Delivery Lead for PlanH with BC Healthy Communities Society since August 2022. My role is to provide research, resources, tools, and supports for our PlanH communities. The agenda for today, our keynote speaker is a partner from the University of Victoria, and our 2022 PlanH community partnerships with a team that is joining us. And then we will do some question and answer from you. If you could pop that into the question, we will begin to circle back to those questions towards the end as we have a Q&A. I'll do our land acknowledgement as folks are jumping on and adding theirs. I thank you for adding it, Terrell. And so it's our pleasure today to join you from BC Healthy Communities Society offices are located on the surrounding traditional lands of the Tecumseh, Esquimalt, and the Kwanghan Songhees nations. We have the privilege to work, learn, live, and age on these lands, and we thank you so much for that. Today, some housekeeping. I know we have all been quite netiquetted out, but we ask you to put your questions in the Q&A and the chat function. We will have some resources, links to be added, and you can click on those as we go through because we have multiple links to share from our speakers with you. So today's event, we're also live tweeting. So if you could use HPP series, PlanH, Healthy Public Policy, and we're also recording this today so that you can share it and view it again later, share it with some friends and colleagues. And post the webinar, we have a survey link to hear your valuable feedback on these topics. So right now, I'll go into a little bit about the BC Healthy Communities and PlanH. BC Healthy Communities Society has been around for multiple years now. I think it's going into the 17th year. It's a province-wide not-for-profit that facilitates the ongoing development of healthy, thriving, and resilient communities. We at BC Healthy Communities believe that it is possible and necessary to create communities where it's easy for citizens to be healthy and well. We operate at the intersection between planning and public health. Now, a little bit about PlanH specifically. PlanH, since 2012, for local and Indigenous governments, we provide grants with cash as well as supports for local government and Indigenous partners across the sectors for creating healthier communities. It provides opportunities, resources, and leading-edge practices for collaborative local action. We recognize that community policy plans and decisions affect health and well-being for all. Partnerships with the Ministry of Health and supporting the health promotion from the province. It's really an important partnership that we are all working together to create a healthy and well-being for every member in BC. So a little bit about the series today. I wanted to spend a moment talking about healthy public policy, its role in local governance, PlanH has been focusing on HPP, a healthy public policy, for the last few years. This is a powerful tool for all governance bodies to create conditions for thriving, equitable communities and ultimately provide all community members with a good well-being and lifestyle. And perhaps what's most exciting is that it clears the pathway in creating a systematic change for current challenges that we face, such as poverty, housing, climate change, and specifically, we are hearing wise practices and experiences on partnerships today from Dr. Sarah and Team Mission. Our intention for you in attending this today is that you learn how to build partnerships with Indigenous communities. You hear about the latest research braided together with real life experiences. You listen to the partnership example from PlanH 2022, such as Team Mission and Dr. Sarah's work, and that you learn the differences between strategic partners, those who you work together to advance a same purpose, and your boundary partners who your work touches and impacts, those around you that may be not participating at the moment, but could be partners in the future because your work is actually touching them. So just a high-level introduction for our keynote today. Dr. Sarah Wright Cardinal is from the School of Public Health and Social Policy at the University of Victoria. For the last 8 years, she has been engaging community wellness projects with Indigenous nations and organizations, primarily in BC, both rural and urban. She has been awarded multiple large grants and celebrated multiple times with prestigious awards in both 2022 and 2021. Sarah will situate herself as a further introduction as she starts her presentation and talks about her work. And now over to Sarah. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Tanse, Nisikasun Sarah Wright Cardinal, Kaskewewa Negwa, Carbo Island Ochinia. Nemosam Narcis Cardinal, Equanocum, Agadejule Kosi. Just a few words to situate myself and to acknowledge my ancestors. And I'd also like to raise my hands to all of the life givers that have made it possible for us to be here today. I come to you today from Musqueam territory, where I'm visiting for a few days. I normally share my time between my homelands of Treaty 8 and Pachidat, which is a Nuu-chah-nulth nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. I appreciate those of you who have shared where you're situated and who you are in the chat. It's good to see the diversity of participants here today. I frame my work as being a helper where invited, an oskapwio in our Cree language, which means a ceremonial helper. And in that role, we listen to our elders and knowledge keepers, and we support wellness work by being given direction, by observing, and by sharing the skills and gifts that we have. And so that's the way that I approach my work as a professor in the university and in the communities that I work with. Next slide. So these are my homelands at Caribou Island, which is on the border of Alberta and the Northwest Territories. My mom was born there on the land, as was her mom, her aunties, and the previous generations. I'm the first generation born in the hospital and being raised speaking English. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a picture of my granny, Agatha Desjardins, who I acknowledged in my introduction. And we were a land-based family. And that shift from land to public housing only happened in the 1950s and 1960s up north. That may have happened earlier in urban places in BC. However, it's still a relatively recent shift from our governance, our ways of knowing and doing, that we're land-based, to the colonial Canadian ways of doing. So I also share a picture of my granny in the top corner, working in the receiving home of the hospital where I was born in Fort Smith. A residential school was brought to our community in the 1950s. So you can see the school-age children have been given haircuts to attend the boarding school. And then the younger children, like the little baby my granny is holding, were put into the foster care and adoption system. Such as myself, I was adopted out in the 60 scoop as well. Then there's another picture of my grandparents holding me in the hospital, and we didn't know that that would be the only photo of us or what was to come. However, you can see that my grandfather is not doing very well. He had returned from the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital in Edmonton, where he had been sent because of tuberculosis. And we know that the Indian hospitals, that was a segregated system, the same as residential school, and also the approach to child welfare with Indigenous families. And so my grandfather experienced non-consensual medical experimentation or medical procedure. However, we were able to have him back home for a few years. And this picture is very meaningful to me, that I was able to have this photo of us together. And then in the bottom right, there's a photo of my youngest experiencing their puberty rites of passage camp a few summers ago at home. And so I invite sharing a bit about my family story to weave together the reality of the Indian Act, the difficult reality and truth-telling of how Canada was settled, the displacement of Indigenous peoples, families, and communities, and the laws and policies that we lived under. And so really what we're looking at today is, how do we contribute to community wellness? How do we address and undo some of these historical harms, some of which we still live with today, and the intergenerational impacts? So my work is really focused on those opportunities of community wellness where I'm invited. So communities that I'm in relationship, as well as my home community. And so again, that photo there is so meaningful because my youngest was able to participate in a gender fluid puberty rites of passage camp at home on our territory with elders and knowledge keepers. And coming from a family where my granny was a traditional pre-midwife, and the midwives had that role throughout life, it really is a full circle and a healing for our family to be able to participate in that. And this image here, we are downriver from the tar sands. So we're north of Fort McMurray is my homelands. And next slide. So Indigenous knowledge systems, the way that I write about Indigenous knowledge systems is that it's a living process or a lived curriculum that comes from the history, cultures, beliefs, and values of each nation. So each nation has its own natural laws, ways of doing, and ways of knowing that the only way to really understand that is to experience it by being in relationship with a nation. And when we talk about being in relationship, we're referring to all living beings, not only human relatives, but non-human relatives. And honoring the spirit of each being is very important in Indigenous knowledge systems. So what I'll be talking about today is relational community ethics and how foundational that is to all work. I think we're going to show a video. I'll just give a context on the next slide. So this was a project with Pachidat First Nation. I've been working with Pachidat for 5 years. This particular project, bringing the Chaputs to life, was a 2-year fund where we were focused on protective factors for youth, mental health, learning and practicing new channel teachings and skills, guided by elders and knowledge keepers and mentors, and with a natural opportunity for young men to contribute to community by carving a 33-foot cedar dugout canoe and being able to gift that to their relatives in the village and gaining self-confidence in their roles and responsibilities as Pachidat young men. So I'll invite us to watch a little bit of this video.
This was a project that was envisioned with matriarchal wisdom and some of the things that, Native communities are struggling with. Young men's wellness is really important to the community wellness. When, communities are suffering, then some people have to pick up more and carry more of the weight. This was an important exercise to remind younger men of the importance of being who you are and where you come from by actually living it and doing it. The project wasn't just carving a canoe, it was an enshrining a lot around what it means and what the potential of what it can bring back to the people. And that essence and the historical fact that there's been a generational gap in traditional carving.
We were ocean-going people, so there was probably tons of canoes around in our community, and it's more than just a vessel. It's a life. It's a provider. It's a protector. It's a means of transportation to better things.
It's really empowering to see this from start to finish, a raw log, everything that went in between, working with the other guys and creating a brotherhood through something so positive like this. And to have that connection with the ancestors, it's just something that's been long overdue. I've found another log that I hope to be able to work with in the future to make another smaller version of this. I really want to make a sealing canoe to bring back the sealing tradition to our people. I just really want out of this to be able to pass it on, for this not to be the end, to keep it going.
People bond together when they're doing things like this, right? It's a nice experience. I feel it's like a healing process, traditional healing, artwork. It's good for the heart. Made me happy out there.
I enjoyed working with all the tools he said, and just showed me once, and it was like, all right, grab the tool. It's like, hey, this is how I do it. I don't want to break the tool.
I think you had some fun with the chainsaw early
Yeah, I
on.
like the fun chainsaw.
From my perspective, I think he matured in ways around just, coming through adversity. For me, that was part of the essence of what the project meant, other than being an apprentice and learning how to carve a canoe. It's awesome to have your boy there.
Yeah, Tyson loved to come up there, just ready to go. All right, gotta go do some work.
Yeah.
Go work.
I helped by skinning this canoe. Little tools we use, but I don't know the name.
Cultural healing. This community's healing.
I actually didn't even want to live anymore. And I got really lucky that this project came along. So it literally saved my life. Like, I'm not kidding, it saved my life. I've made a lot of new brothers and sisters from this project. And, I'm just really, really grateful for the whole community and everybody that made this happen.
One of our biggest medicines as Indigenous people is laughing. And we laughed a lot. And that in itself will be something that I will carry with me forever.
From the start of the project to now, I think it's done a lot more than we had expected. Each milestone was amazing to witness and to see. It brought our community together, the younger kids and the older generations. It's not done, and it's just like a beginning. I think it's a beginning to so many cultural pathways that we need to rekindle in our community, put that fire back in.
As an Indigenous professor, we're called on by our communities, by our nations, and the nations that we're in relation
with UVic in Pachidat over the last 2 years. It's a great day to be Here standing with Master Carver Micah from Leq'a, and we got DT members here also supporting. The three sisters at Leq'a, Pachi and DT live together as one, and our bloodlines are really strong.
Wanted to share a little bit of that video to give a sense of feeling of the project, because certainly I think the video really expresses the depth and of the feelings and of the importance of the work that we've been doing together. And I invite everyone to watch that video if you'd like. And it's a nice 12-minute video. And we could look at our next slide. That was my partner, Tracy Charlie, who was speaking about the canoe, and critical to any effective partnership. We need to have a really good relationship with leadership and key positions in a nation in order to be able to provide a project in a meaningful and responsive way. So there were 4 parts to this project. I just want to walk through it briefly here. The Leq'a master artist, Micah McCarty, spent quite a bit of time in community sharing a knowledge with his relatives at Pachidat in order to bring this cedar tree back to life as a chapats. So the way that we approached this project was with a master carver and young men apprentices. And we focused on canoe family teachings, enlivening the ancestral knowledge, and really bringing the village together during the pandemic, which was a really tough time for many in community. Next slide. We wrapped this around with Culture Night, which is a bi-weekly community event, which is an opportunity to awaken the songs and dances. Relatives from Ditidot, about an hour down the highway, come in as lead singers to share those songs and dances, and so that Pachidat will be able to bring that back to the community. And it's really about babies and elders coming together and having a winter cultural activity similar to the old days when winter was a time of potlatching. We've also been able to support women's group, community arts night, and men's group as well with our work together. The third element of the project was a curriculum and children's book. So I always find it's important to listen to the community as to what kind of outputs they are seeking. And Pachidat's in the process of increasing their school from K to 5 through to grade 12. So we created a curriculum resource for K to 5 that's land-based and bilingual in Ditidot and English, and it allows for children to see themselves in the classroom. We made a children's book as well as a curriculum unit, and of course, when we plan a project, we think about everything that we're going to create and to ensure that it all stays in community. So the canoe, the paddles, the regalia, all of the tools and equipment that we needed to purchase, all of this stays in community. And we think about the key people who will be working with us, as well as those who will be helping, whether it's knowledge keepers or helpers, and that we ensure that there's honoraria and gifting, appropriate gifting for everybody who helps with our work. And the fourth and final element of this particular project was a youth conference, the fourth element. We had a youth gathering last summer, so it was the children who named the chapats, Warrior Woman. And so we have a Warrior Youth Conference, and that was bringing the sister nations and nearby nations together to at the campground and having land, language, ceremony, and sports, and being able to gift the the curriculum that we made, as well as these beautiful drums that the master artist has made and gifted to his relatives. They're up in the school, and it allows for form line design. There's a lot of good work that the community, youth and adults, are able to use from these drums, not only to play the drums, but also to have these images, the stories that go along with it, and the form line design. So essentially, the way that I frame my work is that we are healing from colonial disruptions to Indigenous identities. Often when we think about Indigenous peoples or Indigenous issues, we think about residential school, we think about other policies that we've experienced. But what I really want to emphasize today, when we look at this picture of my granny and my relatives, yes, those things happen to us, but that isn't who we are as people. If we look at the bottom picture, this is an example of a sophisticated knowledge system that lives in the ceremonies and teachings of Pachidat Nation. And every Indigenous nation has its own teachings, its own sophisticated knowledge system. So it's really about a paradigm shift from this hegemonic space where we are often viewed as other, to this spirit-based space where we're working in meaningful ways with communities, where the nations or the communities are identifying their priorities. And those of us who are helpers, we find a good way to be able to support that vision and those possibilities. A few thoughts about the university partner as a helper. Again, it's about nurturing spirit-based identity. So when we talk about holistic ways of knowing, we tend to include the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so a spirit-based identity, we're remembering that we are, as humans, we're a small part of the cosmos, and that all of our non-human relatives, the lands, the waters, the trees, the four-legged, the winged, that we are being mindful in the work that we do of that perspective or worldview. And that when we look at project governance, that people like me in the university are often viewed as experts. However, in community, it's truly our doctors of the land who are the experts. So it's important to engage, depending on the structure of the nation. Might be hereditary leadership, there might be elected leadership as well, elders or old ones, knowledge keepers. And I also find it's really important to have youth voices at the table as well. When we think about our knowledge systems, kinship family system, it really is about the extended family from babies to elders. And there's so much that can be learned through that intergenerational engagement. So I do try to frame my work in that way. And also that we walk with the strength of the ancestors. I introduced myself today in what would be Baby Cree. My children learned in Head Start how to introduce themselves. And as an adult reclaiming language, I practice when I can. And it is shared that our ancestors smile every time they hear us speak. So no matter how little we know, it's important to practice. And it's important as allies as well, to be able to, it just makes elders so happy when they hear us greet them in the language. So I invite us to walk with the strength of our ancestors and to be flexible, humble, and gentle. We might have a timeline, but to do really good relational work, there really is no timeline to good relational work. And that we might call something a project, but in fact, it's a way of being in relationship that's ongoing. And it enriches our lives as partners just as much as it can enrich the community that we're working with. So when we're doing this work, I invite us to think about our own self-location. with the communities that we are working with here in what is called British Columbia. I really like this from a reconciliation toolkit. It invites us to think about our own personal and family histories that brought us to the lands where we live and work, and whether we're aware of the history of the land that we live and work on, and what sources have we drawn on for this information. Were our family or ancestors impacted by colonization, oppression, structural violence, or war? And what is our own understanding of the impacts of colonial violence against Indigenous communities? And then what's my own understanding of the role played by the health, education, justice, for example, professions in colonization and residential schools? And then what does reconciliation mean to me? What does reconciliation look like? So I invite a reflection on this when you have time to really think through how to go about community partnerships in a good way. I also like this list from Amnesty International around allyship. And so there's some tips here about how important it is to listen to and follow the community and to center the stories around community. There's a way of expressing what we have faced and what we are working through in strength-based ways. And that will come from the voices from the community. Having that historical and cultural context, also never showing up empty-handed. What can I bring to the table? How can I be respectful in protocols? How can I learn the protocols of the nations that I'm working with so that I gift appropriately those who are sharing their time and knowledge with me? Always seek consent and permission. So anything that I write or speak to, I pass by my community partner, and nothing's published without permission. And often we publish together. It's important that we're responsible for ourselves and know when to step back. And I think it's Robin DiAngelo that writes about white privilege and white saviors. So, and there's a historical context in Canada around helping professions, but it's important that we don't need saviors, we need solidarity. And to be mindful of others' time and energy. Sometimes we can forget in certain roles or positions, jobs that we have, in a cultural context that might look a bit more laid back, we might not always remember how important another person's time and energy is, or the role that they have in community, if it might not look like that by their email address or by the way a person dresses, like myself, in a t-shirt and not a suit. And certainly we also do no harm to the community. So a few more thoughts on Indigenous partnerships, that it's really about relational ethics, that relational ethics are foundational to all the work, and that's going to take more time, whether we are from that community or in relationship with that community, or it's a new partnership that we are seeking. It's really about meaningful, respectful, ongoing relationships and the desire to contribute with one's own gifts and skills into some sort of community wellness project, and to really follow the protocols of the respective nations that we're working with, and to value the existing strengths and assets that the nations or communities already have. Some key areas are revitalization of Indigenous languages and legal orders, so the natural laws and knowledge systems, reform of education curriculum, Indigenous models of business that advance self-determination goals. Also, Indigenous rights and well-being is sometimes framed as community wellness, and in the literature, key determinants of Indigenous people's health are primarily through self-determination, sovereignty, and cultural continuity. So I tried to share that today through that video that we saw and with the notes that I'm sharing today. So it's really about co-creating and co-collaborating so that it's a very participatory, organic, collaborative work led or co-led by Indigenous communities and grounded in Indigenous worldviews and approaches to research. And I say research just to note that anytime we do a project, we are usually gathering some kind of data, whether it's often stories or images or video. We are gathering knowledge to be shared back to a larger community. So we want to do that in a good way that respects Indigenous ways of knowing and doing and being. And then once we have completed the work together, that we find meaningful and inclusive dialogue between communities, researchers and all levels of government, so that we are applying what we've learned in a meaningful way. And I think we're going to learn a bit more of that when we listen to Team Mission and the good work that they did.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. We learned so much from the 4 elements and the video of action and working together with communities. We just are delighted to hear the paradigm shift that we can experience and to learn about, just that identity and the teaching from a spirit-based perspective. And I thank you for that. I was going to venture to try and say the tree to the kaput. I don't know if I said that correctly, but
Yeah.
I tried. And I turn it over to Team Mission, and I just want to share a little bit about them. Thank you, Sarah. Team Mission has 3 speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce this PlanH 2022 City of Mission Partners. Their project is developing a community wellness plan and building partnerships. They specifically reached out to create meaningful engagements with key partners representing the Indigenous community with 2 goals in mind: to create a plan for dialogue and to establish relationships with elders and knowledge keepers. These speakers will share their field experience on their partnership process as a role model for those coming after them. And without further ado, I turn it over to Team Mission. We have 3 speakers there, and they're going to take it away now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Connie. Can we move to the next slide, please? So before we get started with our part of the presentation today, I'd like to start off by acknowledging that our work here in Mission is taking place on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Stalo people, particularly the Skowlets, the Camel, Samath, Matsqui, and Kwantlen First Nations. Next slide, please. So for us, you'll see as we go through our presentation that in terms of our land acknowledgement, we really have that rooted in our priorities and mission around how we can move forward together, how we can work on building meaningful and respectful and purposeful and ongoing engagement and relationships with our local Indigenous communities and Indigenous serving organizations. And through our presentation, we're just going to share one example and a couple of projects that we've been working on that's related to this. So I'm here today. My name is Jen Cook, and I'm here in my role as Primary Care Network Manager with the Mission Division of Family Practice. And in the role that I'm representing today, I've had the honor and privilege of being part of our Indigenous working group that we'll talk a little bit more about later on in the presentation. And I am joined by 2 of our partners today, so I'll hand it over to Kirsten.
Sure, thanks, Jen. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kirsten Hargreaves. I'm the Manager of Social Development for the City of Mission, and my role for the city is as the liaison for all of our nonprofits and community, all levels of government, our health authority, our school district, our 5 Indigenous bands that intersect with community volunteers, anybody that wants to be connected to community work. We've taken a real community development orientation to the role and the work and the mission the last decade and a half. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'll pass it over to Barb.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Blanchard. I am currently the Leq'a First Nations Health Center Manager. I've been in that position for 2 years, and I've been working with Leq'a First Nation for the last 5. So in the last 2 years, we've recently become and a very independent health center. And yeah, I'll get into a bit more about that through our presentation a little bit later on. But part of my job in there is to reach out and form working relationships with service providers in our area. So thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Next slide. So what brought us together? So the work that we're going to be sharing about that came through with the support of the PlanH grant really started before, long before that project began. So one of those streams and one of those routes that brought us together was through our primary care network. One of our strategic plans here in Mission is around how we can support to enhance Indigenous health services within our community. And the first step that we took under that strategic plan was to form our Indigenous working group. So where we started with that was around connecting with and inviting all of our partners to the table that represented our local Indigenous communities and Indigenous serving organizations, to share our goals and our visions and where we were at, but really more importantly, to take direction and leadership from the group around what does enhanced Indigenous health services mean? How can we help support that work in Mission? What's needed, and really to be able to walk alongside and follow that direction. And in those early conversations, we had conversations around how do we start this journey together? How do we move forward together? And who is missing from the table? And we are often revisiting that to see how we can grow and expand our network of partnerships to make sure that that as many voices as possible can be part of this process. And through those conversations, it was really clear that if we were going to work together, we needed to get to know one another. And so what we wanted to do was to have a gathering where we could really come together and to be able to celebrate one another, to be able to have an opportunity for our local Indigenous communities to be able to share about their culture and history, and to be able to share a meal together and to really start things off in a good way. So next slide, please. So really this work is all about partnerships. So while myself and Kirsten and Barb are here speaking today and sharing our experiences, I really want to I really want to reinforce from my heart around how this was really about all of our partners coming together. We're just here sharing our experiences, but this work would not have been possible if it hadn't been for the wider network of partners that we have, had it not been for our working group, had it not been from existing foundations of other partnerships that we were able to lean into and draw from, and to be able to really just come to the table and work alongside together. So next slide, please. So with this one particular event that we're going to share about that we were able to gain PlanH support from, we called our event Coming Together, One Heart and One Mind. And what shows on the screen here in kind of that pinky red color are some of the key partners who were part of the planning. And in blue were some of the other partners that were there and part of the event that were really key to it. But honestly, this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of all of our partners. As I mentioned, we're part of our Indigenous working group, and all of the members that are part of that working group are not shown here on the screen. We would need a much bigger screen and many, many more bubbles to be able to show everybody that's been involved. So really a collaborative effort coming together. And it's warmed my heart to see in the chat that some of our other partners who have been involved throughout this process are here today. And so it really gives me that sense of friendship and moving forward and working together. So I'm really happy to see that. So next slide, please. So this one day, and I'm going to hand it over to Barb to share more about this day in particular, but as you'll see, there was kind of our immediate intentions around the day, but you'll be able to see throughout our presentation that it's really already begun to have a bit of a ripple effect within community and opportunities for other projects to grow. So with that, I will hand it over to Barb as we move to the next slide.
Yeah, this is something that I've been putting a lot of thought into and how to collaborate and talk about this day in particular. So we hosted a coming together, One Heart, One Mind event in October. And this started from, I can't even remember really how it started, but really the best learning that I can take from this is actually the working groups coming together and the planning. We had a number of organizations that come together and a number of people through Mission and the PlanH that helped fund everything to come together. So there was a lot of working partners in behind, and I don't even want to begin to try to mention them all because I'm going to forget somebody, and that's not my intention. But what it did is it allowed us to learn how to speak, how to represent our community's needs, but it also allowed us to show a little bit of who we are. And I feel I want to keep using the term we because there's this event we presented together as a team, and we had representatives from the Friendship Center who represented our urban and away from home population. And then we had representatives from Scallop's community as well, because we worked on this for many, many months before this day. The day was really just the party, right? So it was, for us, it seemed like it was the big day for us to sit down and meet with everybody and open the door for future communications. And that's what I find for the working group that come from afterwards, is that actually allowed us to open up the door and say, this is how we can work together. And this is how we can plan things. And obviously it showed a little bit of who was involved. And there's so many organizations that are wanting to work with us and do projects and things. But sometimes one of the biggest teachings that I learned from my grandmother is things happen for a reason and things happen in a process. And we have to recognize that. So things don't always go as you plan. And it is, what's meant to be is meant to be. So, and how things come about. So it's, our working group is exploding. It's going to continue to get bigger and better, and we're going to have more people. But the best thing that I can say for this coming together, One Heart, One Mind event is that it started to open up the door for trust and allowed more open, meaningful, sustainable program conversations to better the health of our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it over to Kirsten.
Sure, thank you. What struck me about that last slide was the diversity of representation at that day as well, from elected officials to physicians and community, all kinds of folks coming and sharing their time for a whole day. And to spend an entire day together in that way with such a huge diversity of representation was such a privilege and such an honor that we so rarely get time to do. So a big part of the day for us was really beginning with those initial questions, especially with the city folks, around the ability to spend a day together and to throw out the idea of formalized agendas and some of the things that some of us are very used to working within, to the focus on relationship and what that really means. So I asked people very specifically to not look at their phones that day, to put away some of the things that become common practice, especially in municipal environments. And so we had very real conversations around pulling away from the volume of workloads and emails and what that's like and what that means, and really listening, that if that was uncomfortable for some, okay, let's listen to that and let's see how we can accommodate that. So really having real conversations and making time for deep listening to each other was also an important part of setting the foundation for moving into this work in an authentic way. So these ideas and the bullet points you see in this slide around shared mentoring, shared learnings, it's difficult to have shared learnings unless we're willing to be really honest with each other. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. It means uncomfortable questions, uncomfortable space. So really creating safe spaces to be able to ask questions and be able to share some of those things in our learnings about each other and our ways of working and values and workplace expectations and all of these things that come together when we're looking at formalizing partnerships was really important to start this work off in a good way. This idea of shared goals. So really going to community and listening well to a multitude of community partners around what's important, what matters, what can we do together. We are so aware in Mission, as I'm sure many of you in the communities that you are sitting in as well are realizing that we've had some really deep impacts of the COVID pandemic. And what were already challenges in our communities are now quite exacerbated in many areas. And so how do we acknowledge that? And the pain that many people have been through, moved through, continue to be in, and yet carry these really beautiful goals together of working together to move forward in the future. And so again, really real conversations that are not easy to have, and there's no clear-cut answers or formula for those kinds of things. And that alone makes some folks really uncomfortable. So making lots and lots of space and time for those conversations. This idea of inclusivity and the messaging that this really is about walking together. It's not about top-down agendas when we're looking at ground-up community-based work. That's a very different process-oriented way of working, and helping people understand that maybe that's new for. Commitment to ongoing engagement, and we've heard that throughout this presentation today, that this is not a one-off, that this is the beginning of what we hope will be continued relational ways of being and working together. This idea of solution focus, that we're all very aware of some of the concerns we have and that we carry for our community members, and we want to hear those. We also want to work together to carry those together moving forward. So collaboratively looking at solutions. This idea of intentional time. So really needing to make that intentional time to be able to do this work in a good way, that intentionality. And then we mentioned COVID. And so the very real impacts that's had, and the importance of learning for each of our communities what those impacts are for different agencies, different people, different populations. If we can't understand that, it's difficult to move forward in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. So where to start? And we'll go to the next one, unless anyone else jump in. Since it's three of us presenting, I'll pass this over to Barb.
Yeah, where to start? That's, our community's needs and stuff. So some of the things that have spun off from here is opening up, and where some of the partnerships that we're taking this idea and moving it forward is with the children's hospitals. So we've recognized a great need and some areas that need some improvement and how to access and things like that. So that's one of the other ones that are coming up. Participating in the community wellness strategy with the City of Mission. I can just speak for myself, but I was invited to attend that, and my hope is that on the next one that I'll bring more people from our community, from different departments, to put in there, because we're very much the same as any organization where we have kind of our expert leads in different areas, so they would speak better to different things. And then our Indigenous working group and advisory networking. I think that started off as a connection-based group, but it's shown to expand a little bit more, and I'd love to see that just continue and add more and more partners on into the group, so that we can keep the momentum going. It opens the door to expose people to different partners, different areas where they want to expand into different programs and stuff as well. Jen?
That sounds great. Thanks, Barb. Next slide, please. All right, and then back over to you, Kirsten.
Sure. So happy to show you some images of our brand new Mission in Motion Mobile Clinic and Outreach RV. This is a brand new partnered program in Mission, and quite literally, it's an RV that is intended to offer social service and health opportunities. So physicians, a whole variety of social service supports and offerings, with all the partners wrapped around this idea and this vision as the people identifying where this RV needs to go. So where are the hotspots in community where folks perhaps living unhoused, people experiencing barriers of different kinds, that this RV can go and access. And we heard very clearly in our community wellness strategy engagement processes with individuals with lived and living experience that the need for mobile services was great for many reasons across many barriers, from inability to get to a doctor due to lack of car, mobility needs, being in wheelchairs, to discomfort for so many reasons to access various office spaces and places in community. So the hope is that this program and this RV can really address some of those distinct needs that we heard clearly through the engagement process. So we're very excited. You'll see on the top right corner, there's a little mobile medical bed. And so that's for our doctors and nurses and health practitioners to go out and connect with people and really literally be able to do wound care and pelvic exams and all kinds of those supports. So happy to be launching this mission.
That's an amazing visual with the mission in motion. I love that RV that's going out, and thank you for sharing the photos. It always brings it to life. I appreciate Team Mission coming and sharing that their seed of idea that they had submitted to PlanH blossomed into so much more, and their partnerships are not a one-off event, that it's a continuation and really a celebration of multiple people coming together. So I do thank them for that. We have a little bit of time for Q&A. And so questions, if you put them into the Q&A, that would be fabulous. We did have one question that came in from Amelia, and recognizing that there can be many perspectives within a community, sometimes they may not all align. How can allies best navigate those differing perspectives? And I know this came in during Dr. Sarah, so I'll turn it over to her. I know that she had a little bit of an answer in a chat that she would share. So Dr. Sarah.
I'll also invite Team Mission to answer as well. So I think what I shared there is that it's really important to take direction from the community partner. So whoever one is already in communication with, and that might be the health director, it might be the education director, it might be the lands department, whichever department you're working with is a good place to start. And then if one isn't already familiar with that nation and how they're organized, then it's a good idea to spend some time getting to know how that community or that nation works. And there might be hereditary leadership or elected leadership. There might be an elders advisory council. There may be different governance and decision-making bodies or processes in place, and that would be where we would get our guidance and direction from. And then with whomever we're working with is to create some space for that community dialogue, to hear about what the community is already doing, what the community's already tried, what this looks like, what it's called in the community. Some of the language we use, like harm reduction or these types of terminologies, that might not be the words that are used to generate that input from the community, and then put a plan together. And I'll invite Team Mission's thoughts as well.
Hi, it's Barb. I'll go first. So that I read that question, and it's really interesting because I find in my position, I get a chance in my community, and it's different for every community. So I have an opportunity to sit in bi-weekly chief and council meetings, and I sit with other directors and other managers from different departments. And one of the operating things, and I'll just share what we do in our community, are operating as through what we call our strategic plan. So we engage with communities, and they give us a direction as to how they want to move us forward, what they would like to see next, and it gives us our working plan, right? So I think the networking and stuff between different departments, because it's interesting. I never realized that even in my own community that our lands department was already working with the city of Mission. They're working on something totally different, right? So my goals are health. So I agree with Sarah's comment about reach out to whoever you have contact with. And maybe that's an opportunity to do something similar to what we did in October, where we can have a community meeting together with the community and say, how can we look at the bigger picture? One of the things that I'd like to say, though, is be mindful of, make sure it's at the pace that the community would want, right? So the community has to be ready to receive that. And I know for our community, I've been tasked with bringing in services and networking with other resources and things, but it's under the direction of how my community wants to receive it. So, I mean, we can, under health, it's so easy because I can just open the door and say we have space for rent for any healthcare providers, but that's not what my community wants, right? My community wants it to be culturally appropriate, culturally safe. They want to have the providers that they would like to see in the community. So those are my goals. So I just caution when we are reaching out that we are taking that step back and allowing the community to invite you in as they're ready for you. There is lots of situations and times where people are ready to go and they're just so eager to get in, but that community is not ready to receive that. So at that moment in time, but don't forget them. Keep that contact, keep that relationship, and when the opportunity is there. And that's why I always go back. I say this a lot, but things happen for a reason, and things are put in our path for us either to learn from or to grow from, and we have to not forget that. And that would be the same message for anybody else who's looking for that. Thank you. I'm not sure if
Thank
there's
you for
anybody else.
that. I think one of the things, we're sort of coming to the close of our time. So I thank you for responding to that. It's been a great pleasure listening to the stories and the recap, just in the question and how to best proceed when you're coming together as partners and how to respectfully do that. I really thank you for that. Just in wrapping up today, if you were intrigued by this presentation and you'd like to hear more about healthy public policy, you can always visit the website planH.ca. You can apply for an age-friendly community grant, which window is open right now. You could email the YouTube link that we send out to share with other friends or colleagues. We can provide feedback. We'd love to hear from you on our pop-up survey today. And you can also speak with our team. We have multiple people available to help you with topics, planning, equitable community engagements, and local economic development. We'd just like to thank you. And here are the thank yous and our slides, our contacts. You can reach out to anyone that was on the webinar today. And we'd just like to say thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you so much.